Good morning, Zio here, and today we're talking about Halo, a Halo TV series, once again, because why not? So, grab yourself some coffee, sit back, relax, and let's get into it, shall we? But yes, Halo. Yay. Anyway, so why are we talking about this? Because of the same old arguments I keep seeing everywhere. You have to remove Master Chief's helmet because FPS equals terrible story format, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. And the worst part is they do it on the first episode, right? So now that you've heard me that, you've gone ahead and downvoted this because you're all in that camp or what. Now let's just go over some reasons as to why this argument is terrible to begin with. All right, so first things first, we're just going to look at the Metacritic score. It's got a 5.8 from users, which is bad, very bad. Anyway, and yeah, that's where that is. But anyway, so I keep seeing the argument, right? You can't tell FPS games that their story, it's bad, blah blah blah, you can't do this, that, and the other, and all this other stuff. And God, it's a weak argument, it really is. And then if you bring up something like the Mandalorian, which I think I did in another episode, another video, you know, their go-to gotcha moment is, well, the Mandalorian took his helmet off a couple of times, therefore your point is invalid, that sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, see, here's the thing with this. The Mandalorian never had to remove his helmet. It still would have been a good show, regardless of whether he kept that helmet on or off. And, you know, the second time he pretty much takes it off is for a mission in the second season. You know, people will look at that, of course, and say, well, they would have had to have done it anyway because of that and all this other stuff. In reality, they don't. They really don't. You could easily, with a creative mind, figure out a way to go about doing that entire area without ever actually showing the Mandalorian's face. And I'll explain why. And the same thing goes for Master Chief, right? You know, the only real reason they're showing Master Chief's face in the show, in my opinion, is purely to own it, right? So what's going to happen is, if 343 ever actually does show Master Chief's face, you're going to have the Halo TV series bros all up in arms if it's not the exact same face. That's where we are. They have decided that they have claimed that for themselves. It is theirs, her, regardless of what, you know, the actual fans to the property want. That is what they've done with that. That is the whole purpose of showing off his face. And if it is for the reason because they're incapable of telling a creative story without showing the protagonist's face, or a protagonist's face, you know, then they're bad at their job because it's been done, right? And the biggest, most notable example recently has been the Mandalorian. So how do we do this without actually showing the Mandalorian's face, right? Because I talked about it, alluded to it, all that stuff. You know, Mando shows his face because he needs to get dressed up near the end of the first season because he might be dying at this point. That entire scene can still take place without actually showing his face. It's real simple. Between somebody else's head being in the way of his during that, or during this, that, and the other, or showing him from another perspective in the room, you never actually have to show Mando's face, and you can still continue to have that mystique around the fact that Mando has never shown his face to the audience. Now, the same thing can also happen with the second mission. The next time he shows his face, which is pretty much for that mission where he's pretending to be something else, trying to infiltrate the base, get the information, that sort of thing. Those entire things can be done cleverly with a clever writer, with a clever crew, when it comes to cinematography and stuff like that, to do shots that still give the same effect that they did without actually showing his face to the audience. Now you're probably saying, how? Do you have any examples for that, Z? Come on. Do anything like that? So yes, we do. I think Deadpool is a good one if you're looking for something more live action, where the scene that he has no clothes on, yet you never actually see his private sections. Anything with that, and that was an action fight scene, right? Things can be done cleverly. If you want to go into anime, where this is more of a common practice thing, there's a few ways of going about it, doing it. You can go the lazy way, like for instance Sony, because they've suddenly decided that they're Puritans or whatnot, where they have to put light rays where light rays don't exist, sort of thing, to cover up different body parts and stuff. That's the lazy way of doing it, right? Or you can go the more creative way, the way that fits with the thing without taking away from it, right? A good scene is from One Punch Man with Saitama, after he's lost all his clothing because it's all been burnt off and stuff, and the city area is kind of in ruin, and there's smoke and all this other stuff floating about, fires and things. And they still give a clear shot of Saitama in several of those scenes. However, something is always just perfectly in the way, and it's done in a way to where it's not out of the ordinary for it to be, right? That camera angle is just in the perfect spot, no matter what, to where you don't see the things those things, right? You can do that for somebody's face as well. And that's the difference between lazy writing and creative writing, of course, and cinematography when it comes to things like that, depending on how they would handle a situation like that. You're trying to keep something more PG, so you can't show somebody's, private parts or whatnot. They go about doing that, or you can take the lazy way, and then everything's just got smoke where there shouldn't be smoke for whatever reason, or mist where there shouldn't be mist, that sort of thing, covering up stuff. Right, between hair and other things, you can make things go naturally and have it covered up in a way that would be natural, that isn't off-putting, offset, doesn't look weird, right? Like the lazy way of going about doing it. You could do the same thing with Mando's face, which you can also do the same thing in Halo. In fact, Halo, the video games, have done that, strangely enough. Because the other argument is, well, he takes off his armor in the books because it's armor, not skin. Therefore, it's not unlike him to be without his armor or his helmet in the show. And that's true. That's a totally true and valid thing. The thing is, here's the difference. The books don't really go into great detail on things when it comes to Master Chief's actual looks that I can remember, right? And their books, it's writing, so Master Chief is going to look whatever you make him look like in your mind, regardless of how it's described for the most part. But in the video games, there are a scene or two, if I remember correctly, where we actually, it gets to the point where we're like, oh, his helmet's been off this entire time? Kind of deal. And you're like, wait, we could have, no. That sort of thing, because then he puts on his helmet or whatnot after talking to somebody, looking into the glass and, looking out and all this other stuff. Then he puts on his helmet. Scenes like that can be done IRL and still not disturb the mystique of who is under the mask. And that is probably one of the greatest plays on Master Chief, whether it was intentional or never intentional, and it turned into that, which is probably what really happened. It was, they didn't bother with that because Master Chief's just never going to be without his armor in the game for the most part. So there's really no reason to draw a face on him or anything, and it saves on time, energy, and all this other stuff. But it eventually evolved into this thing where that sort of became a stay for the show, right? That became a thing. What's under the mask? And we never know about it. And then the show strips that away from the community. That's all it was there for, was to strip away that mystique, that that everything away from the community. There was no real reason for it. Now, whether or not Master Chief is the main protagonist, I'm pretty sure isn't even the case, right? With the Halo show, we're too busy following around what's-her-face. And it seems to be a show more geared about the politics of the UNSC, or whatever the heck it's called, USFC, I can't remember. Anyway, the politics between that and this other group, that's, rebels against different stuff and things, and more following around this particular woman as more the focus, right? Which is unsurprising with today's sort of thing. They want to do that sort of thing anyway, even no matter what, regardless of who the show should really be focusing on. And Master Chief is more of a supporting character or co-star-esque sort of thing. He's not going to have a majority of the screen time. He's going to have bits of the screen time, and all this other stuff. So there's really no reason to ever actually show Master Chief without his armor on for the most part, especially if really all he's there for is the action portions of the show. And even if he is, having sort of a sit down with somebody, he still has to be ready to go for the most part. And this is sort of one of those weird things that that the show writers and other stuff apparently should have checked with the military beforehand. You're on duty, you've got your uniform on, you don't really take it off unless you're taking a shower or something, and for the most part you're ready to go. You're sitting there hanging around watching TV in your uniform on the thing because you need to be ready at a moment's notice in something that hot, essentially. So, because you ain't got time to go and find your pants and put on your shirt and change this, that, and the other when you need to go run and pick up your gun and start returning fire or something like that. Not saying that things like that can't happen in his off hours or whatnot. Maybe, he gets to whatever. But it takes away from a lot of the realism and other stuff that they're going for when they make little mistakes like that, in my opinion, of course. But yeah, there's really no reason for him to ever have his helmet off in the show outside of them claiming that they now own Master Chief and you can just get over it because you're an ist or a phobe or this, that, and the other, right? And that's really what it boils down to it. And all the arguments for Master Chief to ever take off his helmet are weak at best. If not, it's just something completely made up and pulled out of somebody's arse to try and make a point that doesn't actually exist, right? But yeah, the two big ones, of course, is FPS equals terrible story format. And then, of course, the other one. Anyway, back to the FPS equals terrible story format. Let's go back to that for a second. That's the other main argument that a lot of people keep making, right? FPS equals terrible story format. You can't tell a TV series in FPS. Okay, so what? It's like these people have never actually played an FPS, or their only FPS they've ever played is Call of Duty. For the most part. Yeah, Call of Duty has a story. Would I call it the greatest story of all time? No. Battlefield has a story, but I wouldn't call it the best story ever or anything. And those are FPS games. But there are games out there that tell incredible stories. Halo is one of them. And guess what? It doesn't tell it purely from the FPS perspective. The gameplay is from the FPS perspective. You going through the campaign, going through the levels, of course, that's in the FPS perspective. But in between those bits, and sometimes in the middle of the levels themselves, if a cinematic plays, it's not in the FPS perspective. Which makes me wonder if these guys are just brain dead or have never actually played a story-driven FPS before. Halo, of course, has the aliens, the weapons, and stuff like that. And as it advanced from Halo 1 to Halo 2 to 3 to ODST, and so on and so forth, the cutscenes have gotten better. The story has gotten better. It's added upon what it initially started out with, and it has overall gotten much better. And this idea that you can't tell a good story through FPS is just bunk in general. They're either thinking that you're referring to Call of Duty and the whole show needs to be in first person for some dumb reason, right? Or they're maybe thinking Doom from 1995, where the story largely consists of text blocks between different worlds. Now, Doom, of course, has a story behind it, right? You're a Marine, you're the last Marine, essentially. You're making your way through this thing, you're trying to get off the moon, then you die, you wind up on the shores of hell, you decide, like any other normal Marine of your time, going, you know what? F this, hoorah, let's do this, and go running. And I forgot actually what it is that Marines say, but anyway, it's been a while, and then you decide to go kick demon ass, right? That's what you wind up doing as a Marine. You decide you're going to go kick their tail, and then Doom Guy is born, the faceless protagonist of the Doom series. You never really see his face ever, and he goes through, and yes, there's a story. It may not be played in CGI because it didn't really exist back then to the way it does now, but guess what? The new Doom, the recent Doom Eternal, exists. There is stuff that happens. There is a story. Is it the best story? I don't know. It probably isn't. I've never actually beaten the game, but I have played through a good portion of it, and it's decent. For what it is, for the story that it's trying to tell, it's a decent story in the Doom franchise, right? And it's doable. This idea, because FPS, first person shooter, equals terrible story format, is dumb. It is asinine. It is disingenuous. It is purely from somebody who is uneducated and has never actually played those games before to actually know. They've just seen a few. Their only real exposure is another game that has a super bad story or doesn't really have much of a story, and they just assume all of them are like that. Another good one, Time Splitters, has a decent story. That's an FPS. I enjoy Time Splitters. This idea of going through time and all this other stuff. I mean, outside of that portion, it's good, right? Everything else about it, maybe not so much. But, the idea of following Cortez around and doing the things and getting into the antics that they get into, it's a decent story for its time, right? For an FPS, it's not bad. But yeah, this idea that FPS equals terrible story format is bunk, in my opinion, and is not a reason why you have to remove his helmet. But yeah, I guess that's what I've got. We've gone on long enough. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I will talk to you later. See ya!
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment, smash that like button, and always subscribe for more. And of course, there are other videos floating around somewhere on the screen, so click one of those and see if you can find something that suits your fancy. Till then, I'll see you later. Bye.